Behind every smile lies a story the world was never meant to see.
The camera sees what it wants to see. The tuxedo, the smile, the man who made James Bond relevant again. For a decade, Pierce Brosnan was the definition of elegance. He carried himself as if nothing could touch him, and the world believed it. But smiles can lie. Behind his blue-eyed charm was a man who had buried more heartbreak than most could imagine. A boy abandoned by his father, a husband who watched the love of his life fade away, a father who stood helpless as the same illness claimed his daughter decades later. It's almost cruel, the contrast. On screen, he was the hero who always survived, the spy who could leap from a dam, dodge bullets, and leave danger smoldering in his wake. Off-screen, survival looked very different. Hospital corridors, long nights alone, and the quiet discipline of a man who refused to collapse in public. The irony of Brosnan's life is that the role that defined him, James Bond, was both his greatest triumph and his deepest prison. The tuxedo made him immortal, but it also trapped him in an image the world refused to let go of. While the franchise thrived, his own grief was hidden behind red carpets and press tours. Few knew what he carried in silence. That when GoldenEye exploded at the box office, he was still grieving Cassandra, his wife who had died of ovarian cancer just 4 years before. That when Die Another Day crowned him as one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood, he was bracing for the devastating news that his daughter, Charlotte, had inherited the same fate. The myth was Bond, the man was Brosnan, and the two were never the same. This is not the story of another movie star. This is the story of a survivor, of a man who climbed from poverty in Ireland to the highest echelons of Hollywood, only to discover that fame cannot shield you from loss. The poster showed a hero who never flinched. The truth is darker. Behind the smile was a man living with the kind of pain even Bond could never escape. And that truth is where our story begins.
Pierce Brendan Brosnan was born in Navan, Ireland in 1953. His father disappeared before he could form a memory. His mother left for London to train as a nurse. And so the boy grew up in fragments, passed between relatives, sleeping in spare rooms, walking to school alone. He later called himself a solo boy. It was not childhood as most know it. It was silence, abandonment, and the constant feeling of being on the edge of other people's families. But loneliness has strange gifts. Pierce discovered imagination. With no father to guide him and no mother nearby, he invented stories, knights, adventurers, heroes who always found their way home. The act of pretending became his shelter. Years later, the world would call it acting. At 11, he was finally reunited with his mother in London. But the city gave him no welcome. His Irish accent made him a target for ridicule. He was shy, withdrawn, invisible. School gave him little hope. At 16, he left with no qualifications and no clear path forward. Art was his first escape. He trained as a commercial illustrator, sketching in silence. His hands could draw a perfect line, but his heart wanted more. One day he wandered into a theater and saw actors rehearsing. The electricity of the stage struck him. Here, at last, was a place where the solitude of his childhood could be transformed into presence, where silence could become voice. He joined a workshop, stumbled through his first lines, and felt something awaken. Acting was not about fame. It was survival, the chance to step into lives bigger than his own. The Drama Center in London honed him further. Teachers saw discipline in him, a hunger rooted not in ambition, but in need. He was not chasing glory, he was chasing belonging. On stage, the abandoned boy could finally disappear. It was during these years that he met Cassandra Harris. She was older, confident, already successful. To him, she was more than a partner. She was the stability he had been denied as a child. Through her, she gained not only love, but family. He adopted their children, and when their son Sean was born, Brosnan at last held something permanent, a home that was truly his. This foundation shaped the man the world would later see. The tuxedo, the composure, the poise, they were not natural gifts. They were armor, forged in the fires of a lonely childhood. When audiences spoke of his Bond's subtle sadness, they were seeing the boy who once stood at the school gate alone, the teenager mocked for his voice, the man who built himself from silence. By the early 1980s, Brosnan was poised for bigger things, but his rise would not be smooth. Destiny had already shown him its cruelty. It would test him again and again, offering glimpses of triumph, then pulling them away. The boy who grew up invisible was about to step into the spotlight, but the cracks beneath the surface had already been set.
By the early 1980s, Pierce Brosnan was no longer the shy boy sketching in silence. He had become a presence, tall, magnetic, impossible to ignore. Theater gave him discipline, but television gave him visibility. His first break came with the 1982 miniseries The Manions of America, a sweeping Irish immigrant saga that mirrored his own longing for belonging. Hollywood took notice. That same year, he was cast in Remington Steele. The role was a revelation. As the mysterious con man turned detective, Brosnan blended charm and wit with an elegance rarely seen on American TV. Overnight, he became a household name. Women adored him. Men envied him. Studios circled. But success carried a shadow. Playing Steele made him famous, but also trapped him in type. He was the suave leading man, never messy, never broken. Beneath the polished image, Brosnan still carried the insecurities of his childhood. He feared losing it all, feared being replaced, feared the silence he had once known. Then came the call that could have changed everything. In 1986, producers approached him to take over as James Bond. Roger Moore was stepping aside. Brosnan, with his looks, charisma, and rising fame, was the perfect choice. The press celebrated. Fans imagined him in the tuxedo. For a moment, destiny seemed aligned. And then, gone. NBC, sensing the publicity, renewed Remington Steele at the last minute. Contractually bound, Brosnan lost Bond. The role went to Timothy Dalton. The disappointment was crushing. It was the kind of near miss that could define a career as the man who almost was. But Brosnan refused to fold. He kept working. Thrillers like The Fourth Protocol, comedies like Mrs. Doubtfire. Each role was a reminder he was more than an almost Bond. Off-screen, his personal life offered grounding. Cassandra Harris, radiant and accomplished, was not just his wife, but his compass. He adopted her children, raised their son Sean, and for the first time had the family he once dreamed of. But fate, as always, had its own script. Cassandra's cancer returned, and Brosnan found himself juggling film sets by day and hospital visits by night. In 1991, she was gone. Brosnan was a widower at 38, left with 3 children to raise. Even as the world spoke of his talent, his charisma, his inevitable superstardom, he was navigating grief so heavy it nearly broke him. And yet, tragedy forged him sharper. He kept working, kept smiling, kept moving forward. In Hollywood, resilience is currency, and Brosnan had it in abundance. By the mid-1990s, when Bond producers came calling again, he was ready.
This time, there would be no near miss. The boy from Navan, the widower from London, the man who had lost so much, was about to step into the role that would define him. Pierce Brosnan was finally James Bond. But as the tuxedo fit perfectly, the cracks beneath it were still there. When GoldenEye premiered in 1995, the reaction was instant. After 6 dormant years, the Bond franchise roared back to life. And at the center was Pierce Brosnan, sleek, magnetic, a perfect balance of Connery's steel and Moore's wit. The film grossed over $350 million, and suddenly Brosnan wasn't just an actor, he was Bond. The next decade was his kingdom. Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, Die Another Day, each cemented him as one of the most recognizable men alive. He became the face of luxury, the guest of royalty, the standard of male elegance in the 1990s. But behind the tuxedo was a man under siege. Studios controlled his image, dictating his roles, his grooming, even the interviews he gave. To the world, he was Bond. To himself, he sometimes felt erased. He wanted to explore the darker edges of the character, to reveal Bond's scars. Producers refused. The formula sold, and Brosnan was trapped inside it. Critics added their own sting. Some praised his refinement, others dismissed him as too polished. Brosnan felt the weight of those words. He wanted to be more than suave, more than smooth, but the machine of Bond demanded the smile, the suit, the illusion. Privately, he retreated into painting. Canvases filled with storm clouds and fractured figures. It was the one place he could be raw. On screen, he was untouchable. Off-screen, his art betrayed the tension, the grief still lodged from Cassandra's death. And yet, audiences adored him. People magazine placed him on its most beautiful list multiple times. Brands clamored for his endorsement. His Bond was softer, more human, and fans connected with that hidden sadness in his eyes. It was the sorrow of a man who had truly lost. But by 2002, the cracks widened. Die Another Day was a commercial hit, but critics mocked its success. Laser satellites, invisible cars, spectacle over soul. Brosnan agreed privately. He wanted the franchise to evolve. The studio wanted it bigger, louder. For the first time, he felt the role that had redeemed him was slipping into parody. Still, he remained the icon. Red carpets, premieres, interviews, the world saw Pierce Brosnan at his peak. What they did not see was the quiet fatigue, the longing for control, and the realization that his greatest role was also his most suffocating. Fame had made him immortal, but it had also stolen his freedom. And soon, it would take even more. After Die Another Day in 2002, Brosnan assumed Bond was still his. The film had made nearly $500 million. Audiences adored him. He spoke openly about ideas for a 5th film, stripping Bond down, showing the haunted man behind the tuxedo. Then, the phone stopped ringing. In 2004, the news came bluntly. The producers were moving on. Brosnan was out. Daniel Craig would take over. After almost a decade as 007, he was dismissed without ceremony, without farewell. For a man abandoned by his father as a child, the rejection cut deeper than business. Bond had been his crown, his redemption after years of near misses. Now it was gone, taken without warning. Later, he would call it what it was, being kicked to the curb. The press circled like vultures. Was he too old? Too smooth? A placeholder until someone grittier arrived? The cruel irony. The man who had rescued Bond in 1995 was now written out of its story. Behind closed doors, Brosnan poured his anger into painting. Dark canvases, fractured shapes, violent strokes of color.
His art revealed what his interviews did not: a man bleeding in silence. But fate was not finished with him. In 2013, tragedy struck again. His daughter, Charlotte, whom he had adopted and raised as his own, died of the same cancer that had claimed her mother, Cassandra, decades earlier. She was just 41. Weeks before, he had walked her down the aisle, smiling for the cameras, though he knew her time was short. Days later, he buried her. The repetition was cruel beyond words. He had held Cassandra's hand in 1991 as she slipped away. Now he did the same for his daughter. The grief was unbearable. He said little publicly, only that watching someone you love fade piece by piece is the greatest pain a man can endure. The blows kept coming. His son Christopher battled addiction, a torment that dragged through years of relapses. Brosnan, haunted by his own absent father, fought to break the cycle, holding out his hand, hoping his children would take it. Sometimes they did, sometimes they did not. Professionally, he sought reinvention. The Matador, 2005, earned him praise for playing against type, exposing a darker edge. Other films proved less memorable. Casting directors hesitated. Studios couldn't see past Bond. For the first time in decades, Brosnan felt himself fading from relevance. Yet he endured. He remarried in 2001 to journalist Keely Shea Smith, who became his anchor. Together, they raised 2 more sons. But even in this new family, the ghosts remained. Friends who visited his Malibu home spoke of a private shrine, photos of Cassandra, of Charlotte, candles lit in quiet remembrance. Unlike other stars, Brosnan's downfall was not scandal or ego. It was life itself: rejection, loss, grief that echoed across decades. He never spiraled publicly, never collapsed in front of the cameras, but the smile the world saw had changed. It was no longer the smile of Bond. It was the smile of survival. He had lost his greatest role, he had lost his wife, he had lost his daughter, and yet he kept going. By the time the world had moved on to a new Bond, Brosnan was already fighting battles far more personal than any on screen. His career setbacks hurt, but it was tragedy at home that defined his true crucible. Charlotte's death in 2013 was the climax of a cruel pattern. First Cassandra, then their daughter, both claimed by the same cancer. Brosnan, once again, stood at a bedside, watching life slip away. This time, the loss was unbearable, not only as a husband, but as a father. Weeks before, he had escorted Charlotte at her wedding, smiling through the weight of knowing he would soon bury her. Friends recall him falling silent after her passing. His laughter, once quick, became rare. His paintings darkened into stormy canvases, portraits fractured by grief. Acting remained his profession, but colleagues noticed the heaviness in his eyes. The man who had played invincible heroes now carried sorrow that no script could erase. The pain did not stop with Charlotte. His son Christopher spiraled deeper into addiction. Brosnan fought to save him, guiding him toward recovery, holding out his hand as he had promised himself he would never abandon a child. But love could not always prevail against such demons. Watching his son stumble was another private torment, another reminder that even survival leaves scars. Even Brosnan's own health began to show strain. Rumors of exhaustion, whispers of collapse on set, none confirmed, but all believable. Decades of carrying grief had taken their toll. And yet, amid the darkness, he refused to disappear. He clung to his second marriage with Keely Shea Smith, who steadied him. Together, they raised 2 younger sons, Dylan and Paris. Brosnan poured himself into fatherhood again, determined not to let loss define the future as it had the past. He also found quiet resilience in ritual. In his Malibu home, a small shrine holds photographs of Cassandra and Charlotte lit by candles. Visitors describe it as both heartbreaking and healing, a place where Brosnan communes with the women he lost, even as the world sees only the movie star. On red carpets, the smile still shines, but it is different now, less dazzling, more fragile, as if it knows too much. Fans see elegance. Those who look closer see endurance. The climax of Brosnan's life was not a single event, but the accumulation of wounds, the rejection of Bond, the death of a wife, the loss of a daughter, the struggle of a son. These blows did not destroy him, but they shaped him into something beyond the roles he played. In Hollywood, downfall often comes with scandal. For Brosnan, it came through tragedy, quiet, merciless, relentless. His survival, more than any performance, is what makes his story unforgettable. He was James Bond, yes, but he was also the widower, the grieving father, the man who never stopped moving forward even when fate seemed determined to break him. And that, more than box office numbers or magazine covers, is the true measure of his life.
Pierce Brosnan's life is often reduced to a single image: the tuxedo, the smirk, the man who kept Bond alive through the 1990s. But his true legacy runs far deeper than a franchise. For the boy from Navan, who once walked alone to school with no father by his side, success was never just about fame. It was about proving he could endure. And endure he did, through abandonment, through rejection, through burying the people he loved most. His career gave him applause. His life demanded resilience. As Bond, he revived a struggling franchise and carried it through a decade of change. He gave the world a version of 007 that could charm, fight, and love with equal conviction. His Bond was not just slick, he was human. That subtle sorrow in his eyes, the one fans could never quite place, was not acting. It was lived experience, folded into performance. Outside the spotlight, Brosnan became something rarer, a man defined not by roles, but by devotion. He raised 5 children, standing by them through their darkest struggles. He buried a wife and a daughter, and still found the strength to build a second marriage that endures in an industry built on transience. His Malibu home is not a monument to stardom, but a place of remembrance. Paintings, photographs, shrines to the people who shaped him. Colleagues call him dignified. Friends call him private. Audiences still call him Bond. But the truth is simpler. He is a survivor. Fame never shielded him from tragedy, yet it gave him a stage to carry that tragedy with grace. The industry has changed. The franchise moved on. But Brosnan remains, not as the eternal Bond, but as a reminder of something larger, that survival is its own form of heroism. His story proves that the measure of a man is not how brightly he shines at his peak, but how steadily he endures when the lights fade. In interviews, he rarely dwells on the past. He paints. He speaks softly of family. He walks red carpets with Keeley at his side. He knows the cameras will always see the smile. Few will ever know what it hides. And so his legacy circles back to the beginning. Behind every smile lies a story the world was never meant to see. Brosnan has carried his story with dignity, allowing glimpses but never surrendering the whole truth. That restraint, that grace, is part of why he endures, not just as Bond, not just as a star, but as a man. His legacy is not invincibility, it is endurance, not perfection, but survival. Hollywood has always sold illusions, youth, beauty, immortality. But behind every illusion stands a human being, carrying burdens the cameras cannot capture. Pierce Brosnan's journey is proof that fame does not spare anyone from grief. It only asks them to smile while they endure it. The industry gave him James Bond, then took it away. Life gave him love, then ripped it from his hands. And yet, through it all, he survived, painting, parenting, moving forward in silence. Perhaps that is the quiet truth behind the smile. Survival is the greatest performance of all. Because behind the glory, there is always a cost. And behind Pierce Brosnan's smile lies a story darker and far more human than the world ever imagined.